we're going to kind of review some of the things that we've talked about, but it's been several weeks since we did. So let's kind of remember some things that we had talked about with the Grand Canyon and the different layers of rock that are in there. So we look. Remember, our guiding question is, what do the Grand Canyon's rock layers reveal? If we look at the picture of the Grand Canyon, take a look at that for a few seconds and figure out how many different stripes you see in that picture of the Grand Canyon, and think about what they look like. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Can you find at least 4 different layers of rock? Can you see that in that picture? Okay. So let's talk about this very bottom layer. We're going to talk about that. All right, so let's look right down here. You see that red dot on the screen? Right down here, this bottom layer, there's not any fossils in that layer. So somebody remind me real quick what a fossil is. What's a fossil, Olivia?
It's an animal that was in there, but it's like it looks absorbed something.
Okay. Does the fossil have to be an animal?
No.
What else could a fossil be, Caden?
It could be bones that were like made.
Okay, yeah, it could be bones of animals. But what else could it, besides animals, what might there be as a fossil? Braylee? Leaves or plants can also become fossils.
Yeah,
So
in
in
my driveway there's one fossil.
Okay. Cool. So in that bottom layer, there's not any fossils in that layer. Scientists think that bottom rock layer of the Grand Canyon was formed by volcanoes. By volcanic lava is what formed that bottom layer. But then if we go on up to this second layer here, so here I'm going to kind of trace this second layer for you. There's the second layer. In that layer, there were some different type of worms that lived on the ocean floor. And trilobites and brachiopods lived in the deep ocean, or sometimes ocean water near the shore. And those are the type of fossils that are present. There's burrows from the worms. There's trilobites, and there's brachiopods. So what do you think the Grand Canyon must have been before? A long time ago. What does that tell you if there was fossil evidence of different things that lived in the ocean? What are you thinking, Owen?
Maybe like it was an ocean before.
Okay, so it was probably covered with water at one point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So then, if we go on up to this next rock layer, come right through here, and that last layer of gray. In that layer, the organisms that lived there also lived in the ocean. There's also some brachiopods, some brachiopods, some corals, and mollusks. Those live in shallow tropical water. So what does that give us further evidence of?
That used to be a sea.
Yeah, there had to be some it had to be covered with water at some point.
I don't really know most of the animals.
That's okay. All right, so then if we go on to rock layer C, now we're up here where it's kind of turning brown. Here's your next layer. Okay, yeah, it's kind of a yellowish gray depending on how your screen resolution looks. So there, in that rock layer, the fossils that are there are cone-bearing plants, ferns, winged insects, fossilized tracks of mammal-like reptiles, and millipedes. So is it still going to be covered in the ocean when rock layer C was formed? No. There was some land, probably had some moist areas. Probably had some moist land, like maybe even some swampy type terrain. But all the organisms that are found in that rock layer are organisms that live on land. Some lived on the moist land, and some live in very dry land. So do you think based on that maybe the land changed over time? Yes. It went from being very wet, maybe at the beginning, after it was no longer covered with water, it was still pretty wet, and then it eventually dried out? Yes. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you never know. And there's a lot of different theories on how old the earth is, how long it was covered with water. There's not a definite answer. Nobody knows, because were any of us there? No. Scientists have found evidence that contradicts each other. So they really don't know how old the earth is or how old the Grand Canyon is.
Maybe in the future they'll be able to have good enough technology to.
Maybe so. Yes. They might be. All right. So then we're up here to this kind of reddish looking layer. Okay, yeah. So that's going to be our next layer. And in that layer, there's brachiopods, corals, and sponges again. We're back to some organisms that live in different parts of the ocean. Huh.
It's because there's like an island or something in the middle of the ocean.
What do you think might could happen if we went from fossils that had to be in tropical ocean water to fossils of things that live on dry or moist land, back to fossils that are from the ocean? What do you think?
Maybe it was like really wet, and then it got like really, really dry, but then it got really wet again.
Okay, maybe so. Okay. All right, maybe so. All right, so let's talk about this very top layer. Back to the lighter colored brownish gray. The very top layer up here. There's conifers, there's clams, there's some shark fossils, and some lungfish. Some of the organisms that are found in layer A are organisms that lived on land. Some of them are animals and plants that lived in swamps. And then there's some who lived in freshwater or ocean water. So lungfish are freshwater water fish. So what is freshwater?
Like lake water.
Like lakes and rivers. Saltwater is the ocean, and freshwater is creeks. Yes, creeks, lakes, ponds are freshwater, rivers. Okay? So there's all kinds of different things in those rock layers in the Grand Canyon, isn't there? Okay, so we're thinking that there had to have been an ocean there at some point. Is there an ocean there now? No. Do you think the environment's the same in the Grand Canyon than it always was? No. You're right.
I mean, maybe.
Okay, so do you think that the same types of animals and plants are there now that were there back when these fossil layers were formed?
No.
No. All right, so let's move on. So we've talked about rock layers. They're the big stripes that are in the Earth's surface. We looked at those in the picture. All right, so let's move on. I'm going to show you a picture of a rainbow cake. And I don't want you to say anything yet. A cake, like a cake that you would eat. I want you to think. You're not going to say anything yet. But I want you to think about and make a prediction about the order in which the layers of the cake were placed. Okay? All right, so there's a picture of a cake. It has, you can tell by the different colors and the icing in between, that it has some different layers. What color was placed first? Ansley, what color was placed first? Yeah, that purple down at the very bottom. How do you know that that was the first one? Yeah, it's on the bottom, so it had to have been the first one. What do you think was put there next, Keith? Yeah, they put the purple, then some icing, then that blue layer. Harper, what came next? The green. Jaden, what was after the green? Yellow. Caden, what came next? What was the last layer to be put on, Dylan?
Red.
So we know, looking at that cake, that the bottom layer was the one that was placed first. So what does that tell us about the Grand Canyon? Yeah, the bottom layer, that rock layer A, was the one that formed first. Then which one formed the most recent?
The top one.
Exactly, the top one. Yeah, the top one is the most recent. All right.
How old is the Grand Canyon?
Well, remember we talked about that a little while ago. We're not really sure. There's a lot of different evidence about the Grand Canyon. All right, so let's think back to when we first started learning about the Grand Canyon. There was a team of explorers, John Wesley Powell and the men who went with him. What did they use to navigate through the canyon?
Boats and horses.
Boats, yeah. So there has to be a what through the canyon?
Water.
Yeah, there has to be water. We said that the Colorado River runs through there. So I want you to think, what type of organisms do you think might survive in different areas of the Grand Canyon today? So we know that there's a river. We also know that it's in the what? It's sandy. It's in a desert. All right, so I want you to think about what you think might be there today and why.